What's up, peoples? This is Jose Marquez along with my co-host Chico from the Cause and Effect crew, and we want to thank you for joining us for another Sunday BYOB podcast, where we have real conversations with real guests about real life issues. Our goals are always to stimulate the body, soul, and spirit with thought-provoking conversations, jokes, and some drama. Just like some like to bring their own bottles to parties, we ask that you bring your own Bible, perspectives, curiosity, and insight about life, today's issues, and that together we discover a better way to deal with life. I hope you're curious, because if you are,
let's go.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the BYOB Bring Your Own Bible podcast. I'm excited. I'm hyped. I feel like small. Right? At 6 feet, usually you're in a good place, right? Like you're usually taller than people, but now I feel like I'm a little shadow, like a little tiny little shadow in between two giants. And when I say giants, I don't say that lightly. I really am excited for these two. I know that you guys are going to be blessed in this next episode of our season, Church Hurt, where we're trying to reach those that have left church for some reason or another. And I think we got a great story that we're going to share here today, a nice little journey. Yeah. And we have a return guest from Staten Island, Senior Pastor of Christ Uncensored House of Worship. If you don't got a church out there, you do now. Because after hearing this man, Pastor Ruben Remedios, better known as Pastor Ro, and his little, how tall are you?
6'2".
His little 6'2" little brother. Pastor Ruben Remedios. What should I call you, Rube, or what's your nickname?
Whatever
you want it to call.
Whatever you want it to be.
I might call you
Rube.
Pastor
Ruben.
Okay, cool. And today we're gonna have a good time. Yeah. Pastor Rube, what you been up to?
Man, oh man. Well, let's see today. Today we I took some time to focus on some graphics that we had to get done, but I also have some graphics that I tend to do. And right now I am creating a map from scratch. I had to create a Staten Island map because the design is about 8 feet tall and 5 feet wide. And so there's a map of Staten Island that my client asked for me to create. And so there's really no maps out there that big, and then he wanted it a particular way, so we created a Staten Island map. We also created a United States map, and now we're going for the globe. We also did New York as well. So
that's definitely going to keep you busy for a little.
Yeah, it's a big project, but I'm excited about it because now I own the biggest map of Staten Island.
And it's going to put you on the map. Let's go. How about you, Pastor? What you been up to?
Honestly, I've been in a transitional space. I'm trying to figure out what the next chapter is for me. And I know that for sure it's going back to school for my master's soon. But other than that, enjoying the post-pandemic life. I think the world is opening back up.
Beautiful. Such a beautiful feeling, man.
Oh my goodness. Trying to remind myself that you have to smile when you look at people now. That's the thing.
Fix your face.
But yeah, other than that, just kind of like, just been really like seeking the Lord. My YouTube playlists right now are all hearing God's voice, how to hear God's voice, talking to God, because I really want Him to be there in this season.
That's so good.
As I'm trying to figure out, I feel like I'm at that place where I'm really stepping into my calling, my spiritual adulthood, if I can put it,
So you're leaving puberty.
yes. I got spiritual gestures.
Oh man, I love it because there's just so many times when we talk about God and when we talk about church hurt or people leaving the church, a lot of times they leave because unfortunately so many of the leadership within church is fake. Right. They're one person and they're very sanctified and holy and hallelujah. and they're a certain way because they feel that that's the only way to have an impact. But what I've seen with you guys, especially at Christ Uncensored, the culture that you guys have set is a very real culture, where you guys allow people and even encourage people be your genuine self, because that's who God wants to use. How did you know that was something that needed to happen?
Wow. I mean, I'll answer from my thought. When we first started the church, we knew that the church that we wanted to be was the kind of church that would reach what we want to say, the unchurched, those that don't have any type of church upbringing, and also those that have left the church. So actually, we started a church with the intention of reaching the unchurched, those that didn't know God, or didn't know church at all, or anything of the sort, and those that were hurt by the church, because that's the kind of church that we intended to be. And we have one of our core values. This is what we want to say is our DNA, is that we worship authentically. It's in the DNA of the culture of our church that we worship authentically, and that comes from, without jumping right into preacher mode, but that comes from John chapter 4, the woman at the well. I love the Message translation, when he says the Father is seeking those that will worship him in spirit and truth, in the NIV, but in the Message translation it'll say, it says, the Father is seeking those who will worship him sincerely as themselves, just as they are. And if you think about that interaction with the woman at the well, it's a pretty amazing interaction, because he says that that's what the Father is seeking. However, she was fronting the whole time in front of Jesus. And what Jesus does, in my estimation, is that Jesus pulls the truth out of her and says, this is all I wanted, for you to be yourself.
You preached this already?
I have, probably. But this is all I wanted. So I don't know if you remember, but he says, when she says, I have no husband, like, why did he ask her that question? That's a crazy question, because at that point they're just talking about water. He goes, go get your husband. She finally says, give me the water, and he's like, go get your husband. And she goes, I have no husband. You know what he responded? He says, you have spoken the truth, which is exactly what my Father is looking for. I know you don't have a husband. I know you've been with 5. I know that the one that you're with. And so for us, it was very important that people can be themselves and worship as themselves.
So good.
And that was very important for us.
That's so good. And I think it's important for our audience to understand that while there are groups that unfortunately are hurt and hurt people, unfortunately, but there still are pockets. There's still what the Bible calls remnants, or these little groups where they're what Jesus desires to be seen in a group. They're authentic, they're genuine, they're loving, they're caring. Not perfect, because we're filling it up with people that are imperfect, so it's impossible for perfection to be there. But the goal is right. The heart of it is right. And I think there's this specific group of people that are out there, that they label themselves, although I think a lot of them aren't this, which is what we're going to be discussing today. But a lot of people out there label themselves atheists or agnostics. Right? And the reason specifically I wanted to bring this topic is because I know that you struggled with this. You were once a self-proclaimed atheist. Now, I never really got into the deep parts of that story. But I think this is a perfect platform to do so, because I know there's somebody hearing us. Somebody's going to run into this video, especially when they see the title, and they're going to, because it's a battle, it's a wrestle. There's Christians, I believe, that have doubts with their own faith, that are like Jairus in the book of Mark, when he says, Jesus, I believe, help my unbelief. So it's like in the same breath, they proclaim their faith, but that faith has some disbelieving roots, right? And you know, if we don't put out a podcast like this, if we don't have conversations like this, because churches shy away from it, but if we don't have these conversations, you know, the enemy will plant that seed. You're an atheist, you're an agnostic, just get out of here, you're being fake, blah blah blah. But it's not that you're being fake, it's just you're wrestling, and that's okay. But when it comes to you, Rube, how would you define an atheist?
And a true atheist is someone who does not believe that there is, I'll be really technical, a higher power. True atheist is someone who believes that there is no higher being. We are just matter. I think, and then outside of that technical definition, and even where my personal route went, I also think, for me, I also think a true atheist should eventually start to lead towards what is called nihilism, which is you believe there's no meaning or reason to anything. But I just think that logically, that's where my mind went. If there is no God, if there is no higher power, we all just existed randomly. Morality, all of these societal things are invented. So I think a true atheist is somewhere there. I don't think, if you're an atheist and you're not a nihilist, no, but I do think what it hinges on is you do not believe that there is a higher power. Not that you know, or, you know, there's never any pressure. I know atheists that have said, I don't know that there's a God. I just don't believe there is one. I think it hinges on where you believe.
Where you lie on that. I mean, I was just hearing a clip on agnosticism and atheism, and I forgot the guy's name already. But he was talking about how there's 7 different levels. You know, we gotta put a name on. You know, I forget his name.
Would it be? No.
I'll get his name somewhere. But his stature was that there's 7 different levels where you go from agnosticism to atheism, and agnosticism is kind of like this whole Socrates argument. I know what I don't know. I know that I know nothing type deal. So their whole belief system is, I don't believe there is a God because I haven't been proven that there is a God, but that doesn't mean there isn't a God type deal. Where the atheist is like, I know there's no God because I know there's no God. That type deal. Right. Now, what captures me with your story, and that's why I'm glad you're here too, because you were a part of that story and a part of that journey, was that I believe you were believing.
Yes.
You were a believer. You were walking your faith. You were walking your journey. And then, like, it felt like it was like this, that I remember you telling me, Pastor, you was like, my brother's an atheist. I was like, what brother? Like, I was like, which one? Because you got other brothers. And when you said Ruben's stating he's an atheist, I was like, what? Yeah. You know, like, that was, I remember that, like, my response was something along those lines. So like, how did that happen? And when he shares it with you, how do you react to that?
Yeah. I laugh because I'm thinking of the story. It's one of the deepest traumatized wounds I felt my brother. So how did I get there?
And how old were you, by the way, when this battle began?
It must have been. It was after we started the church.
Yeah, so I must have been like 18, 19, somewhere there. Because there were a few things that dovetailed with what I was feeling. So that's how I remember them. So I was in an internship program, a business program that trained you in that world, got you an internship at these Fortune 500 companies. And so that was a big mile marker because that played a role in it. But the answer, I think, starts with just even my formative years. I never had a true relationship with God. I'd only known church. And even as I was entering into this time with you guys, and I say Marquez and Rolando primarily because I went to like an event and it was one of my first times meeting Marquez, and you meet Marquez, you just become fascinated with the Bible. That's just what happens. And I remember him talking about it with such detail, and I remember lighting up and I was interested, and from then on Ro began mentoring me and discipling me, and throughout that time though I was getting a lot of biblical knowledge. But in that time with you guys, I hadn't encountered a relationship with God. I hadn't known the person of Jesus. I knew all these things about him, but I didn't know the person of him. So looking back, I know that how did I get there starts with just that one thing. Like, there was I knew Jesus the way I had been taught history class. That's what I knew. And that's what I had learned. And I never really fully stepped into that. And so by the time I was this age, 18, 19, I think, I don't know, I just started feeling like, and it's weird because I feel like I don't have a traditional atheist story. I feel like most people are like, the Big Bang makes more sense. I'm like, no, neither made sense to me. I just felt like I didn't need God. Like, I just felt like, my life's okay. I don't, like, vibe check. I don't got it. I'm not feeling this thing. I'm not feeling the worship. You got pictures of me at Kuhal, knocked out, half asleep. I just wasn't there. And once I started entering into that questioning phase, the agnosticism, I also remember being at this internship program, and they would bring motivational speakers once a week, and I'm like, this is church. Like, you can have church without the God. They're inspiring. They're telling you how to be successful in life. Like there's community here. You can take God out of this and still keep church. Like, I remember being in that phase. And then that feeling started to grow more and more to an overwhelming state. And I just felt like, I don't think that God exists. But I also don't care that he does. So if I'm wrong, I'm also okay with that. And I'm okay with not having God in my life because I don't feel like I need him. That's kind of where I came to. And then Ro, how did I tell Ro? He'll never forget this day. And I'll never forget it because I know. It's one of the few times I broke his heart. He's mentoring me. He's meeting up with me to talk about finances. That's why we are getting together. He's like, I want to help you.
I started making a little money, so I was just, here's how you break down a paycheck. Here's what you want to do with your money.
And then he goes, I'm so sorry. He goes, this here, and then, you want to put 10% for the tithe. And then I was like, about tithing. I don't think I'm going to do that. And at this point, I'm putting words in my own mouth. I'm just giving you guys what I probably would have said. I was something like, because I don't believe in God. And I just kind of sat there and looked at him. I was like, I don't think I believe in God. I think, yeah.
And what was your reaction to that?
Yeah, he doesn't remember. I remember. No, we were at a pizza shop, and we right there on Tarji Street in Staten Island, and again, we're teaching finances, and I was like, 10% savings, 10% tithe, 80%. This is how much. What do your bills look like, et cetera, et cetera. And he's like, I don't think that I'm gonna tithe anymore. He's like, if you want me to, I will, but I just don't think I believe in God. And I was like, well, this meeting just went out the window.
It became a different kind of meeting.
Right? We're not talking about finances anymore. I was like, what do you mean? And it kind of I just kind of heard him out and what he felt, and that's what it was for me. I absorbed it. It was a blow for me in some ways, but it was more because I knew, I'm looking at him and I'm like, I know that God has called you, but then I had discipled him for 2 years, and I'm like, my record is great. I could disciple you into an atheist.
So do you feel like you began questioning yourself, possibly, did I have a role in this? Did I say something wrong? What were some of your more personal feelings?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think that I ever made it about me to that degree. I did, because I knew he was called by God. You know, that I was more like, the extent of self-reflection went, could I have done something better? You know, not necessarily if I did anything wrong, because again, I felt like I was teaching him to the best of my ability, loving him, but could I have done something better? You know, and in that sense, maybe I needed to sharpen certain things. Maybe I've never really had to talk to someone about believing in God from not believing God exists. And then his reasoning became frustrating for me because it was an unusual one. You know, it was what he just said. You know, I don't believe there's a God. I don't think there's a necessity for a God, and quite frankly, I don't care. So in my mind, I'm like, yeah, like you have to do some investigation for you to kind of arrive to this conclusion. You know, like, so my frustration went more to that. It was like, hey, Ruben, like, this is a pretty big question, you know? And, you know, his concern was like, honestly, I just don't believe God exists. And I really don't, like, my life is fine without God. I don't have any connection. He's like, I genuinely don't have any connection to God. I don't feel what you feel. I don't feel what Lisa feels. I don't, it's not for me. He goes, and it's funny because he says what a lot of modern day atheists today say. They say, I can see the benefit in religion. You know, there are benefits in religion because religion does provide a sense of belonging. They do provide a sense of identity, a moral base. I see the benefits of religious activity. He's like, because he's like, I love the church. You know, I love everybody in the church. Yeah. I don't feel what they feel, and neither do I care about the God that they worship.
That's so good. How did you feel about Pastor Ro's response to you, like when you shared that? Because you said at various times, like, this was the time I broke my brother's heart. Yeah. Like, why? What makes you feel like you broke his heart at that moment? Was there a reaction or?
Yeah, I actually only know that from conversations afterward. He had a good poker face. He played the role, I guess, because I could not see that it impacted him in that way. I had knowledge. I knew, like, the guy's a pastor. He's been discipling me. I'm also his brother. And I think even prior to me being an atheist, we had talked about, like, the frustrations of our family not being fully in the faith. Because I think we were at a Misfit conference.
And if I can interject real quick, that's the other part about it. Like, my family, for the most part, are not churchgoers.
No.
But ain't nobody not believing God.
That's something totally different.
That's a whole, like, what do you mean you don't believe in God? Listen, I might not go to church, but listen, I believe there's a, like, my older brother is the most God-fearing, anointed, non-church goer that I ever met. Absolutely. You know what I mean? Like, you ask that, you're sick, he'll pray for you. He'll be at the club tomorrow. He'll be probably getting drunk, and but you ask him, he will bring down the fire of God. Dude, it's crazy. It's, it reminds me of that verse that the gifts of God without repentance are irrevocable. The dude is anointed, but definitely not following his calling, and so my family is there. My family, there's no member in my entire family that I know. None. I'm talking about from grandparents to, like, everybody believes in God.
So Ruben was the first one.
Ruben was the first one to dare say those words.
And how long did that process last?
Well, that leads me with a mother like mine, not long. I went to church more as an atheist than I did as a believer in God. So I want to say like a year and a half. But the second I told my family, I mean, and to his point, like, it's crazy because my whole church, like, we come together in a crisis, and Ruben not believing in God was a crisis. Every one of them started going to church again. They're there every Sunday. My mom is there. My mom's like, it's okay. Like, there's these things on, like, can you not take communion? She's like, you can take it. As an atheist, I'm like, all right. But I was really only going for her at that point.
She had kind of said, right? She was like, please just do it for me. There was a sense, my mom would be a good person to interview because
she's the best.
she for sure felt the impact, as a mother, for her it was just like, no, this can't be happening. And so she would tell him, hey, do it for me. If there's anything that I ask you to do,
just do it for me.
Can you just come with me to church?
Yeah.
Just do that.
I find your story so interesting because I've talked to atheists that their atheism is rooted in God not responding in a moment of crisis. I've talked to atheists where the atheism is rooted in kind of too much knowledge. Like they read a little bit of this, a little bit of this, and then they convince themselves on it. Now when it comes to you, like it was kind of none of those things.
No.
Right? And so how deep would you say your conviction in atheism was? And how did it get there?
Because I'm so stubborn, very deep. Once I'm convicted of a belief, it's really hard to, you've tried to get me off Android before, and then I inevitably end up at an iPhone, and now I'm just as convicted about that. If I fully have done the research, if I fully got into that place, so it was pretty deep. I would say there was probably a layer of just not deep enough, and if I'm I'm really trying to work through that for the first time right now. I think so. I mentioned leaning towards that nihilistic level. There was a block that felt just as illogical for me, and so the block was, there is no God. And then I would go to the nihilist route and think, if evolution is true, if the Big Bang Theory is true, then what in the society is a construct. And that's where you could go into Socrates and all these things. Like, these things that we do, they're all a construct. I mean, even like the law, right? In New Jersey, it is perfectly fine to turn right at a red light. In New York, all of a sudden it's not. It's arbitrary.
It's illegal to pour your own gas.
It's crazy. All these rules are arbitrary. And I felt like the same with morality. But then I just couldn't explain the fact that love was still in me. I still had a love for my family. I've also dealt with suicidal ideation. And what would always keep me is knowing the heartbreak it would cause my family. And I could never wrestle with those things. Like, okay, if I know in my mind that that's abstract, why in me does this sense of moral and consciousness exist? And I couldn't explain it. And then what I do know, and even as an atheist, logically, I was like, I understand that only God could objectively define morals and things like that. But then apart from an existing God, it's all random chaos. But then why do I then still feel these things in me if I think they're arbitrary? So I think that's what was always like I'm like 15 steps out, and then like I would just trip there, and I couldn't rationalize. I couldn't out-argue the concept of love.
And what would you say? I love that. What would you say were the defining moments that began to steer you back?
Okay. So being at the church every Sunday put me in that place. I think there was nothing specifically that, like, I don't think that it was a steering, like a spectrum thing. I think that there were a few key moments. So one of the things were the way that Ro and Lee responded and were with me in that process. Ro never made me feel judged or like, I can't believe this, or even like, he never really tried to like sway me. He just accepted me as I was. Lee would always annoyingly be like, it's just part of your story, it's just part of your story. You know?
That's so Lee.
She like, it didn't budge her at all.
No.
The whole entire time, like, because it was a big thing for our family, you know. Lee was like, It's okay. It's just part of his story. It's going to be a great testimony.
Yeah, I wanted to say, so with him saying a big thing for our family, if I could rabbit trail and then circle back, my mother later on would say, to show how much it impacted her, Ruben, you don't, like, I would pray for you every night, and I would cry sometimes, and she was like, you don't understand, like, you could be a millionaire, you could be successful, you could be the president, but if you did not know God, I would consider it my biggest failure as a parent. So
yeah, it was heavy.
That's how much it was hard for my family. But the support from Rowan Lee, being encouraged to remain in church, put me in that place. And then there was just a friend I was hanging out with, and she was a believer. And I remember lamenting, like, it's so annoying. Like, I feel bad for my family sometimes, sometimes, the precursor to that conversation is that Ro one time was like, for me, I just feel like you were never, like, yeah, you were doing the studies, but you were never really pursuing a relationship with God. He always said that. He's like if you would have said, you're saying you don't feel connected to God, but you've never really connected. You've just shown up on Sundays, like, what's your prayer life like? What's your devotion time look like? That's never happened. And he was like, honestly, like, if you were to say, hey, bro, I did this for 6 months and it looked like this, and this, and he's like, that would have given me a peace. But my tension that I wrestle with is, you never really gave this thing a try. And that always stuck with me when I would have these moments. And so in the conversation, I saw how much it affected my family, and I was like, honestly, sometimes I want to pursue God just for them, like, just to see, just for their sake, so I could at least feel less guilty and say, like, hey, Ma, I tried, and now I can stop going to church finally because I can say I tried. That's where it came from. And then her response was just like, oh, so why don't you just do that? And I was like, because that's not genuine, that's not me, that's not. She's like, yeah, say that. Say, like, hey, I'm not pursuing you for you. I'm pursuing you for my family. And I was like, oh, I think I can do that. And really it was the motivation of, I will feel less guilty. And that's what I thought. I'm like, all right, I'm going to get into this 6 months, and I can say I tried the whole thing, and then be at peace.
Yeah.
So I called my brother. I said, hey, man, what's the Jesus diet?
What's the formula?
That was such a tough question to even answer, right?
I know. And he gave me a few things that he thought. I went with some things that felt like my conviction. And I remember praying, like, literally, like, God, I do not care about you. I don't care if you're real. But my mother is hurting. My family is hurting. And so for their sake, if you're real, will you show yourself to me? And like a week later, I remember...
It still gets me emotional. It's crazy.
Like a week later, I'm butt naked in my shower. And
thanks for the visual.
Yeah, right. Visual.
I love you as you find
it. That's right.
Because the naked, I could preach too. He wanted me to know
you were in Adam and Eve state. Okay.
So there, I don't know. So I had been doing this listening only to worship, no secular music, reading the Bible. I wish I kept that Bible because I was journaling like, yeah, this stuff doesn't make sense to me. This stuff is nonsense. It just doesn't add up. But so a week of that.
To go back,
I know.
Right, and knowing everything you know.
That would have been so cool.
Yes, I know. But I'm a deleter of stuff. Yeah. Anyway. So I'm in the shower, butt naked, just to remind you guys.
Somebody needs to know.
Sometimes the Lord has to strip. Anyway. And I'm worshiping or something. I just feel my spirit change. And the way that I always describe this moment is all of a sudden now I'm getting emotional. He gave it to me. I felt pain, like this deep, deep void inside of me, and just brokenness. And I started crying, and I felt like, or however that's supposed to be worded, I was being made aware. It's like when, your anesthesia wears off, or, like all of a sudden,
Oh, wow.
I felt like I was being made aware of all this pain and emptiness inside of me, like this brokenness. And then as I was being made aware of it, I felt this filling. I felt this like, oh, I'm empty. And then as I was empty, I felt like God was filling that void inside of me. And so if I articulate it with hindsight, I felt like he made me aware of my need of him, and in the same moment, he filled me. And then that Sunday, I think, if I have the timeline correct, I honestly still don't know which came first, but this one at least is a good story. So I'm there Sunday, and I remember doing it to my brother. Like, I'm sitting there, he does his altar call, and I get up, and you just see, you just see him like, 1, today's your day, 2, and he was not like, like this isn't, if this was like a Hallmark movie, it would be every Sunday he says it and he's looking at me. No, that's not my brother. My brother's like, I don't think he's ever, held on to it like that in that way. I think there was a trust in God on his end. But then I got up, 6'2", I stick out, and I just remember him making eye contact with me, and you just see his like trying to contain it. I came up, placed my faith to Jesus. He asked me to speak. I think we still got that video somewhere on Facebook. And I gave my life to God that day.
I love those. I love these real life stories, because I know that there's a lot of kids wrestling with this. I know there's a lot of, like, I've talked to parents who have daughters and sons that are battling, it's kind of like they're misdiagnosing their spirituality.
Yes.
And it's unfortunate, because a lot of times I feel that leaders and parents take the wrong they take the wrong approach.
Oh yeah. 100%.
Right? And as we end this talk, what would you say, Pastor Ro, to pastors, to parents? What should their approach be in the face of things like this?
I think I'm gonna go back to a verse in the scripture that maybe I've referenced before, but it's something I outline in my book, soon to come.
Love is our logo. You gotta give them the title wrong.
A book that I'm writing called Love is Our Logo, and there's a verse there that's written by John, and he says, no one has ever seen God, but if you love one another, God's love is perfected in you. That's what he says, right? The same author John, in his epistle in John chapter 13, he's writing about Jesus, and he says, Jesus says, I've given you this new command, which is interesting, because he says, I've given you a new command: love one another the way I loved you. Right? Prior to that, it was love one another as you love yourself. After that, it's the way I loved you. That's why it's new. But he says, I am leaving, and you will not be able to come where I'm going. Now imagine him like, that's if you roll with me everywhere, and now I'm like, yo, I'm gonna go somewhere. For the last 3 years, I've been telling you, come with me, come with me, come with me. Everywhere I go, you go. And now I'm telling you, you can't come with me. But he goes, but this is the way you will know. People, the world, those around us will know that you follow me. Up until this time, they knew you followed me because wherever I went, you went. In other words, all they had to see a few steps behind me, and guess who was there? My disciples. So those are Jesus' disciples because they follow Jesus. But he says, Now they're going to be able to tell you're my disciples by the way you love one another. In other words, what is leading you is no longer physical, visible, tangible Jesus. What is leading you now is love. And that's why John later writes, God is love. So let's go back to no one has ever seen God. What did he tell the disciples? You're not going to see me anymore. He says in John, in the epistle of John, no one has ever seen God but God. But if you love one another, God's love will be made perfect in you. And my thought, what I've extracted from that is that people will not ever see God until they see God manifested in the quality of your love. And so to answer your question, I don't think that you deal with these circumstances and situations by winning a debate or by arguing or by articulating your defense of God. I genuinely believe that the way we approach this is by showing them God in the way we love. I genuinely believe that.
That's so good.
That's the way. That's actually the way it's intended to work. If you look at the scriptures, Jesus wasn't. I look at Stephen, right? Stephen got stoned for debating to the gills as an expert, and he got stoned for it. You know, and he was wrecking them. But you don't turn people over through head knowledge or how much you know. You really do it by just displaying the love of God in such a way that is incomprehensible.
I love that.
That'll make the atheist be like, yeah, I don't get it, but I still have to wrestle with how is it that you have the capacity to love the way you do. And the answer is always like, I don't apart from Jesus.
I love that. And I hope parents and pastors and leaders out there are not necessarily taking notes, but that's something you can take to that prayer closet, like, Lord, help me to love like you. Help me to love like you.
It's honestly, if I can say, it's with the atheist, is with the agnostic, is with with someone of different religions. I'm not trying to show you that my religion is better than yours. My religion is better than yours. I'm trying to show you that what I possess, because of what God has done through relationship, will be something that you desire to have and attain.
I love that.
Jesus was one of the most loved people. The only people he wasn't loved by was by the religious folks who were filled with head knowledge. Think about this, not even the Roman government themselves
hated him.
People like, Jesus was hated. It's like, no, he wasn't. He was hated by religious folk. The only kind that, right? Like, that was even the Roman government didn't hate Jesus. So I love that. My thing is, if you lead with love, it'll open the door for truth to be imparted. And so if you have a child, if you have a family member, or if you have just a friend, I get a lot of messages on my DMs. Hey, how do I witness? How do I share? I always say, you start with the most powerful message in the universe, which is God's love. It's the gospel. It's the euangelion, the gospel, which is the message of God's love. And then the second thing is what I would share is your testimony. Look what God has done. Look what God's love has done through me. And then the last thing I always say is just live that out. Be the proper example of what that love looks like in the life of others. Those three things. You share the message of God's love. Number two, share what God's love has done in your life. And number three, like, forget about everything else. Like, and number three, just be a proper display of that. Like if I go to the gym, right? Like, you want to be the proper, like, if your gym coach doesn't look like the body type that you aspire to be, you're like, you see me, I'm your gym coach eating a burger, you're gonna be like, all right, you might know it, but you're not, so that's what I say. So I always say, like, gospel,
Witness.
I say a gospel testimony and represent. Just represent it well.
I love that. And it's obvious that it worked because, again, you shared your story. You shared the impact of the story. And I love that. You have a question? My wife has a question.
Hey, I love the questions. I'm not going to lie. I love the questions.
We could be here all night with questions.
Yes.
So, you kind of answered the question, Pastor Ro, that I had originally intended for you, but this one's for Ruben.
She has a great podcast.
I was just thinking
voice,
that.
right?
Yo, you're gonna hear a bunch.
This is a question for Pastor Ruben. Okay, so how has the journey of being an atheist shaped your journey now as a Christian or a pastor?
That's a good question. So, can I, because I wanted to go here, and I wanted to answer that question too as an ex-atheist too, like rules for parents, and then I wanted to get in there. I might come back to you and go, can you rephrase the question again? Because I think there's a melding in once you do become. I think a particular gifting is the person who becomes an atheist, and that's why. And I'll get there. So. Yeah, what I wanted to say, and I feel like I could say it harsh because I was an atheist, is stop trying to convince them. Like, I became a Christian in a way that I was unconvinced. Like, no one convinced me, no one debated with me. And then I even found myself hearing that people were atheists and wanting to debate them. And I was just like, that's not how God encountered you. Why do you think that that's going to work? And then our favorite, I don't know if you guys know him, the most prolific, he is the GOAT of apologetics, Christian apologetics, William Lane Craig, does not debate to convert atheists. He says, people ask me, why do I debate? I actually don't debate to convert atheists. He goes, but what I have found, and this is why I debate, he calls his whole ministry Reasonable Faith, is that there are intellectual people who are wanting to believe already, but what hinders them is the embarrassment and what am I going to look like, and it looks foolish because it doesn't seemingly make sense the way that God encounters you. It is this, I can't explain. I just know I met Jesus. And that's me saying that, but he says, they and what I do is my ministry exists to show them it is okay. It is reasonable. That's why he calls it reasonable faith. So this is the GOAT of Christian apologetics. And he even says, I'm not trying to convince them. I'm trying to take the people who've already had the encounter, who are already wanting, and just let them know that it's okay. And so we're not going to do that. And everything that Ro said about relationship is so true. And then this is going to start segueing to you. Literally, we have a kid, just started coming to our church about a month ago.
Oh, yeah.
Ironically gave his life to God.
When he said we have a kid, I was like, Ruben, what happened? I don't know.
He's
Pastor Marquez's trauma.
Oh my god. When I say kid, also 20-year-old kid.
Son, you old when you call in a 21-year-old.
I'm 27. I am old. He's been coming to the church about a month, gave his life to God about a month ago, was an atheist. Ironically, gave his life to God at a message that I was preaching.
Wow.
I just got to hear his story, which was perfect. God wanted me to be prepared for this. I was just talking to him, and I was like, what was your journey? And he was like, I grew up in the faith, and then I went to Catholic school, and Catholic school made me an atheist because I would question things. And they would get upset, they would get mad, and I was like, I don't know. But then a while ago, he became curious, started asking one of our church members questions, and she was asking me for advice because she knows my story, and I used to say just that. I was like, just be relational. Don't say, I don't know. It's okay to not know things. Sure enough, he shows up, gives his life to God, and when I asked him why, he said, I just felt a feeling that I couldn't explain, but I knew it was God, and even that at that point it's like I just know that term is a name for that thing that I felt.
So good.
And this kid is like, he's the intellectual. Like I gloss over at some of that stuff with the the theory of ontology and blah blah. I just know I know Jesus. He cares about that stuff. He knew about William Lane Craig, and so he is one of those people. And he's just like, yeah, I can't explain that. I just know that I know Jesus. It's not about convincing them or debating them, and some of it is also just being okay with their process. Getting into your question, I did a good job remembering it. Nice. I was just in conversation with him. I said, hey man, those doubts, don't be afraid of them. You are going to continue to doubt. It's going to, honestly, and this is how I spoke to him, I was like, it's going to be part of your life. And I was able to say that from experience. I used to say this, it's gotten less severe, but I'd be like, I still got my atheist days. I got days that I wake up and like,
oh man.
You know, like there are moments that they're just things that don't sit with you. They're, you know, but if we don't fear that doubt, this is how I was talking to him. I was like, if you don't fear that doubt and you give it to God, because the Bible, Habakkuk, what is Habakkuk a book about?
Yes.
A dude telling God he's not doing his job.
Yes.
That's Habakkuk. Jonah is a dude who wants nothing to do with what God is his calling. God, that's my calling? Nah, I'm good. I'll see you later. Mm-hmm. I'm like, what? You know, and so I'm telling him, like, yeah, the Bible is totally okay with doubting, questioning, distrusting, asking questions to God. Mary, the woman who birthed Jesus, Gabriel says, I'm going to put a child in your womb. And she goes, how? Mm-hmm. And so I said, hey, be comfortable with that. Because if you surrender it and accept that, you will find that is one of your greatest weapons in your faith. The other thing I said is there's always going to be questions. This is not faith if we know. It's not, it's certainty. It becomes science.
Oh good, this is not faith if we know.
Faith is not science. Faith is, and even science relies on certain faith, but it's not. If you guys are married, if you trust Marquez, that he's not going to do you dirty, if you got his location, you can see his texts, you could check his messages, you answer all his phone calls before he answers them. Is there trust? Is that a real trust? No. You have certainty that he can't do nothing. That's no longer trust. Trust involves the risk that you can be hurt. Faith involves the risk that you can be wrong. So I was saying all this to him, and then
just like, I didn't bring you here to be a marriage question right now, okay?
His phone is my phone.
I still have his location.
Yeah, but you know, you get the metaphor.
You want to see my trust?
I love
right
that,
here.
You get the metaphor.
No, but I think that's amazing that you even say that, because I feel like so many times a lot of people have grown up with the idea that whatever God says in this book, that's it.
Yeah.
You don't question it, you don't ask, you don't look further, you just accept it as for what it is, whether you have questions or not.
Yeah.
So we sort of like retract and we don't build on that relationship, because now we have no questions.
Right.
Like our relationship expanded because we ask each other questions all the time. Nice. That's how we build relationship. And if we can't ask God these questions, then we're not building relationship. We're just two people that don't know each other.
Correct. Yeah, and I was gonna say something along that lines to like give you a, you know, for anybody who might have missed the answer and all of that. The way that it's impacted my life now is some of my strongest convictions and some of my greatest revelations started with doubting God and doubting the church. Like as of recently, trust me, the pandemic, I was like, you know, let me see some TED Talks. Let me see if you can do church without God. No, I'm kidding. But it sparked doubts. There were things that I went through, like a whole shift. And thank goodness for Tim Mackey. He's an amazing scholar. But without those doubts, I would have never found that. And you know, we do these things called a Bible Project Classroom, and they're like nothing we've ever seen. But I got that there, and my relationship with God is on a whole nother level. The way that I know Him, the way that I read the Bible has changed. But it started from, I feel like you would have the word for this, like a deconstruction at first. And
like I'm thinking about Rene Descartes
okay.
and his whole discourse on method, where he said, unless you really allow yourself to doubt to the furthest extent that you can doubt something and then find the truth in it, you don't really believe it.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, that in hearing you speak and maybe that's something that we need to grow comfortable with, the questions that spring from them, because, you know, deep questions are leading them to deep faith. It's not the other way around.
So good.
We could stay here probably all day. This is such a great conversation. Thank you for that question, babe. That's my wife that you heard over the line, and I'm thankful, guys. I'm thankful because I know so many people need this conversation. I believe it's an on-time conversation. I believe kids need it. We never like ending a show without allowing our guests to share in a 1-minute synopsis. Like, if you could look at that kid, which camera is he looking at? That camera. If you could look at a kid right now that's doubting, that believes they're an atheist, but they're on the fence with that, what would you tell?
I was literally just thinking, I wish I did that.
There you go. Here's your chance.
This camera. The kid who is doubting. I'm going to say something radical. The first thing is, it's okay. Like, you don't have to believe. Like, we are all on this journey. I tell anybody who, my first step with conversation with people is usually, I live knowing that one day I'm going to pass away and I could find out I was wrong. And so that's the first thing in understanding that. One of the first questions we said was, we worship in truth. And I think that you need to be true to who you are. I think God found me because I was true to who I was first, but who I was an atheist first. Mm-hmm. So know that it's okay. The next thing I would say is, do not have unbelief in God because of your loss in faith with people. Mm-hmm. The church gets it wrong. We get it wrong. He gets it wrong. I get it wrong. We do. And then, unfortunately, there are some people who are out there with malicious intent who have perverted the gospel for thousands of years, killing in his name. But that's people. And I promise you, if you talk to God, he's different. He is. And you don't need to. God found me in a shower, right? Like, you don't need to start with all those things. If you're really, really seeking, or if you really, really want to know, it starts with just, God, here I am. God, here I am. If you're out there, come find me. And I do believe in community. Connect with good people of integrity who you think are people of faith. Ask them questions. If you're listening to this and you know Marquez, hit him up. He's an amazing guy. This whole team right here. If you know Ro, follow him on TikTok. Hit him up. He will have conversations all day. Myself, or if you have people in your community, it is important to find good people that you know are of good character first. And then ask them if they are of the faith, and ask their questions. Pick their brain. Someone who is truly trusting in God will not be afraid of questions and will spend the time with you. And then one last thing is, know that you have a purpose. You do have a purpose. You are called to make a difference. And there's a God out there who's gifted you to do so. And his gifts are irrevocable. And so you can make that difference even in the midst of your struggle with belief. Now, you can. And Jesus does love you. He really, really does. My whole faith starts with, I met this guy named Jesus. He told me I was empty. And then he filled me.
Oof.
So great.
Oh, thank you guys. If you guys enjoyed this podcast, there's a whole bunch of other podcasts just like it. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Sunday BYOB Podcast. We'll be waiting for you. Enjoy the rest of the season. We love you. Be blessed. Let's go. Woo!